Okay, let's wait some time. See people joining. All right, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I see people from all around the globe. My name is Georgie, and I have the privilege to moderate today's conversation between NitroPack and Google. Today, we're going to talk about your visitors. For a very long time, the content was king on its own. Then the content got visual, we added multimedia. Then we made it interactive and we added forms. And years later, 5 billion active internet users, surfing 200 million active websites, we see that user experience is becoming the new content. So this is our topic of the day. We'll talk about performance, speed, and user experience. As we dive into core web vitals for your business, we will showcase how these vital metrics are foundational in your online operations. So regardless if you're just starting off, if you're like seasoned developer or business owner, this webinar will give you the knowledge on how to better serve your visitors. Let's kick it off. As an agenda, we have 4 steps, 4 parts of this webinar. First, we're going to do a brief intro of Core Web Vitals. Then we're going to actually show you why do they matter to your business. We're going to show you how to achieve this great user experience. And then we'll also show you 4 optimizations with real users impact. Okay, so super happy to have today with us Barry Pollard, who is a developer relations engineer with Google, Adam Silverstein, who is a developer relations engineer with Google as well, and we have Ivailo, who is also the CTO and co-founder of NitroPack, and we have me, who is co-founder of NitroPack as well. All right, so let's kick it off. Barry, let me give you the mic.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barry Pollard, and I'm going to cover a little background first on what the Core Web Vitals are, an upcoming change to them, how they work, and why they matter to websites. So, what are the Core Web Vitals? Core Web Vitals are a set of 3 metrics that can be used to measure the user experience of people using your website for 3 different facets of that user experience. There's LCP, or largest contentful paint. This is the loading metric, and it measures when the largest bit of content is drawn onto the screen. That's typically a hero image or an H1 heading. FID, or first input delay, is the interactivity or responsiveness metric, which measures the delay between when you first interact with a page, for example, click on a menu, and when that click starts to be processed by the site. And there's CLS, cumulative layout shift. This is the stability metric, which measures how much the content moves around the page as it loads and as you browse around the site. As well as the metrics themselves, the Core Web Vitals initiative define thresholds under which a site can be considered good and above which it can be considered poor, with sites in between being defined as needs improvement. Broadly speaking, they are a new, and we think, a better way of measuring performance for all sites on the web. One important point to note is that we are in the process of updating our responsive metric, FID, and we are due to replace this with a new metric, INP, or Interaction to Next Paint, in March of next year. We're going to run a dedicated session on INP later in this series, but for now, just understand it's a more comprehensive responsive metric. It covers more of each interaction rather than just the delay, and it also looks at all the interactions, picking the worst one as the INP metric. The Core Web Vitals have some key defining principles that make them different from anything we've had before. First of all, they apply to all pages. The metrics are intended as a generic way of measuring performance that is applicable to all pages. There are certain measures that are going to be very specific to your sites. Often these are closely aligned to your business intent. For example, measuring conversions, or whether that be purchases on an e-commerce store, or newsletter sign-up, or video playbacks. You may also have very specific performance metrics that are not measured by the core web vitals. Twitter famously had a timed first tweet metric, very specific to their business. While these are very important metrics for individual sites to measure, they are very specific to each site or each type. The core web vitals are intended to be a broader set of metrics that apply to all sites. They also directly measure user experience. Previously, we had many metrics that measured specific browser measurements. Timed first byte, DOM content loaded, first paint. These are all attempted to measure various aspects of when a page was loaded, but they increasingly diverged from when the users would experience the page is loaded. As the way we built websites changed, they increasingly became technical milestones rather than real user measurements. By contrast, the core web vitals aim to be user-centric and to measure how the users experience the page performance. Each of the metrics measure an aspect of page experience that is easily explainable at a high level to all web users, and not just developers or web performance experts or browser engineers that understand what's happening under the hood. How long until the largest piece of content is drawn? The lag after you click until something happens. Content moving around as the page loads and you're trying to read. All these are concepts that even a non-technical user, like my dad, can understand. The exact specifics of how they are measured and the various nuances and edge cases, of course, require much more detail and understanding. But at a high level, the concepts are easily understood as measures of real user experience. The final core principle is that they are measurable in the field. And this is an aspect I want to spend a bit more time on, as it's one of the main causes of confusion about the core web vitals. Despite what you may think, the core web vitals are not what Google thinks of your website. It's what your users have experienced. The metrics are not intended to be measured by Googlebot or by a testing tool like Lighthouse, though some of these tools can measure some of these metrics. They are to represent more about how the users actually really experienced your website when they were using it. So the core web vitals are not based on a lab tool like Lighthouse. And Lighthouse is a fantastic tool, and as are many of the other performance tools out there, but they're only good for measuring how your website performs under a specific test scenario, typically a page load under certain network and CPU conditions. This is great for doing an audit on your website for best practices, or for having a reasonable, repeatable setup that you can test changes under a like-for-like scenario to see the impact, but it may not be representative of how your users experience your site. Your users may be on better networking devices than the simulation, or they may be on worse. Users may get different content depending on the screen size or customized content they get, such as recommendations or cookie banners. So be aware of where the core web vitals that you're looking at are sourced from in the tool that you're looking at them in. Some tools may present core web vitals from a lab-based tool like Lighthouse, but these, as I say, may not be representative of your users. PageSpeed Insights is one of my favorite web performance tools, as it shows both the real user metrics and the lab-based tools, and it prioritizes the real-world metrics first, and then uses the lab tooling as a diagnostic tool to give suggestions for improving web performance if you need them. And these results may be very different. In this example, for the web.dev site where we house the core web vitals documentation, you can see a big difference between the Lighthouse test, where we score a very impressive 97, to the measurement of the real user experience, where we are in fact failing core web vitals in this screenshot. And it needs to be remembered that performance is not a single number. Performance is a distribution. We like to think of web performance as a single number, that green Lighthouse score we used in the past, or the 3 core web vitals numbers. But the reality is that performance is a distribution, as we can see in this graph from Philip Walton from my team. For every single website, some users are going to experience that really quickly. They may be on the latest high-spec machine or in a super fast connection. They may have visited the site already, so have lots of the resources needed for the site cached. Some, however, will experience the site as really slow, no matter how fast your website is. They could be on a glitchy mobile connection way out in the middle of nowhere. Most of your users will likely be somewhere in between, again in a distribution of experiences. The Core Web Vitals metrics measure all these experiences, and the number they provide is the 75th percentile of these experiences. That is the value that 75% of the users got at least. In this case, we can see 75% of users can get just under 3 seconds. So that's the LCP number. Many users will get much better than that, but at least 75% of users got 3 seconds or better. And an important point is that this can change. If you get a lot of slow visitors one week, then your distribution changes, even though your site has not. Therefore, you want to ensure you have a performant website with a good bit of headroom for when this happens. So how are the core web vitals known from real users by Google? They are anonymously collected using the Chrome User Experience Report, which collects data from real Chrome users that pass a number of criteria. They need to have enabled usage statistic reporting. They need to sync their browser history, not have a sync password set, and use a supported platform. The Chrome data is then aggregated and made public in a number of tools from Google. This includes PageSpeed Insights, as we talked about before, Google Search Console, Sidekick, which is Google's official WordPress plugin, the Crux dashboard, and the Crux reporting API. All of these Google tools, as well as a number of third-party tools, surface the Crux data to allow you to see exactly how your users experienced your website. Next, I want to talk about why Core Web Vitals matter to your business. Core Web Vitals reflect how real users experience your website, from the first time they load your website to the last interaction before exiting. Providing users with an obstacle-free browsing experience and frictionless interactions increases your chances for improved user engagement. Visitors are much more likely to interact with a greater number of pages in your website if it's a less frustrating experience. There's often a boost in conversion and revenue, as again, users are more likely to trust a brand that offers a positive experience and advance in their purchase journey. You get better user retention, thanks to a lasting first impression that motivates users to choose your business beyond their first purchase. And you get positive experience when the website experience is good, from customers who are more likely to recommend a business they associate with great user experience to their friends and family. There are also SEO benefits to faster websites. Exactly how much is not something that Google likes to divulge, and that's handled by the search team, so I'm not privy to that information either, I'm afraid. One of the reasons that the Core Web Vitals had such an impact is because of the SEO benefits they're seen to have. Faster websites also typically mean more optimized websites, with less resource wastage, that can have a decreased environmental impact. Though it should be noted that some optimizations, such as prefetch or preload, can get data in advance to provide a better experience. So this is not always a given. And this is not just theory. The Chrome team regularly publishes case studies of Core Web Vitals successes on our web.dev site that show real business benefits from improving your Core Web Vitals. And we're always looking for more examples, by the way. So get in touch if you have a good example or if you get one as a result of this webinar. WPOstats.com is another great site with examples of web performance optimization success stories. These case studies are a great way of persuading your boss to invest in web performance. They're also a reminder to measure your improvements and correlate them to outcomes. This makes it easier to understand the impact of your work and plan future web performance work. For an example specific to NitroPack, I'm going to hand over to Georgie.
Thank you, Barry. It's really fascinating that you shared all these case studies, and the link here is amazing. I've personally been browsing these case studies every month at least once. You can see all the listeners and viewers here can go on this link and basically check how many companies are actually making a huge business difference with fixing their core web vitals. And as a direct transition, I'll directly show you basically something we did internally, a case study that we worked with. We actually worked with 3 e-commerce sites, and we generated a case study out of nearly 250K unique visitors. It took the span of 5 days, and the purpose of this case study was to actually connect the slow website pages and the fast website pages, anywhere in between, to the actual visitor behavior. And for the purpose of the study, we actually picked websites who were in the e-commerce segment, and they had a very diverse pages, from very fast pages to very slow pages, in order to just look at the delta and see how the visitor behavior changes. Yeah, so let me start and show you some very interesting stats and graphs. So for the purpose of the study, we actually looked at our first goal was to find the relation between the page views and the visitor journey, how long this journey is. By speaking by visitor journey, that for most of the cases is the visitor session, but it might include more than one visitor session. That's why we actually call it a journey. Still for the same visitor, of course. And yeah, by actually looking at this chart, you can see that we splitted the visitors into groups. First, the visitors the group of visitors who experienced fast pages. For the sake of the study, we noticed that somewhere around the third second, the visitors start to change their behavior and their way of interacting with the website. So we basically took on the left-hand side anyone who is more than 3 seconds, and on the left-hand side anyone who experiences less than 3 seconds. So for these two specific group of visitors, we realized and we found that the 5.42 seconds number of page views belong to the visitors with less than 3 seconds, and that's fascinating because that's technically 60% more page views for the visitors who experience the fast pages. That's the first connection we proved with this case study. The second finding, which is my favorite, is how the visitors drop off second by second from the pages based on their load time. So anyone who exits a page before the page loading has finished, we would consider this visitor a drop off. And based on that, we found that on the sake of our case study in the sample, we found that we have a very dynamic and diverse behavior from 1 to 10 seconds. So we see that in the very early seconds, 1 and 2, the visitors more or less behave in a similar way. So in a similar way, meaning that we see some very similar percent of visitors dropping off. But anywhere, like somewhere around the third second, we see change. And that's why like with this spike of 50% or more is more or less in line with actually what the core Web Vitals and LCP metrics suggests. And we basically, in this sample, were able to prove that. And yeah, basically you don't want to have any pages that are loading more than 3 seconds, because if you have that, you will be losing very soon double-digit percent of your visitors, which directly, of course, correlates to your business KPIs, because some websites convert visitors to shoppers, other convert visitors to engage public, and so on. So based on your KPIs, you want to have these visitors. You don't want to lose them. Okay, going to the next slide. We calculated something we call visitor patience index of this sample study of 3 e-commerce websites. We realized that at 2.75, this is the second of which, the moment at which the page load time is still going, but at 2.75 seconds, the visitors start to lose patience. And this is the inflection point, the point at which the visitors start to have an unproportional quit time. So they unproportionally start to exit the pages. And of course, every audience is different, every website is different, but more or less we see similar behavior starting from 2 to 3 and 4, depending on the audience. In this specific case, we saw 2.75 seconds is the visitor patience index, and that's something that is very relevant for e-commerce to follow. All of the e-commerce sites were in the SMB segment, so definitely, if you're in the SMB segment, please make sure you don't cross this number in terms of page load time. So yeah, in a nutshell, why are we doing that, and why is this important? Because we want to achieve great real user experience, right? So achieving a great user experience is not just having a fast site, but also having a site that is offering like a full load experience. Full load experience, what does it mean? It means that the visitor should be able to see some early signs that this page that he or she has clicked is about to navigate, is about to start giving some visual feedback to the user that it's loading. And that's why you'll see some techniques in this webinar that are really relevant for that, and basically they'll help you understand what is the difference between having the early visual feedback versus delaying this visual feedback for later. And also, once the page is loaded, it's very important to know, and that's all about the Core Web Vitals idea as well. Is it interacting well with the visitor? Is it responsive? So any delay in the interactivity will actually worsen your Core Web Vitals, and that's something you should be looking after as well. And then, is it delightful? Are these interactions smooth, or do they have some lags, or are they like super smooth and obstacle free? So any junk or lag that might appear will be negative user experience. So you want your website to be super naturally interacting with the user. So please make sure you don't have any scripts that are making your website heavy. Or if you have, please make them load in the right moment. And yeah, without further
I think that's great. I mean, I love those stats at the beginning, but I think you're right. We are moving on from just measuring load to actually measuring experience, and that's
yeah
beyond loads, because people do spend a lot more time after the website is loaded, hopefully, and actually doing that and making sure that is important is something that we're spending a lot of time on the Core Web Vitals, and we'll see more and more of. So that's great.
Yeah, exactly, Barry. That's actually like at least half of the experience we want to give. Like the loading time is only 1/3 of the Core Vitals. So you know this better than me. Okay, let's thank you, Barry, so much. Let's continue. So I'd like to introduce Ivailo, who will be showing you some nice for optimizations with real world impact in action.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Georgi and Barry. So this was very insightful, and we saw how Core Web Vitals actually correlate with business metrics. And we also saw how making your website faster can have a really positive impact on your online business. So now we're going to talk about 4 different ways that you can optimize your pages so you can make them faster and, of course, more delightful. So you overall give a better experience to your visitors. We're going to look at ways to provide early visual feedback and how this affects the perception of progress for your pages. Then we're going to look at ways to optimize for above default content and how to render it faster. Next, we're going to talk about responding to user input and again, how to solve some common issues there and why is it important to be responding quickly. And finally, we'll top it off with talking about website jank, what it is, and how to start measuring and moving towards resolving issues with animations, smoothness, and those kind of things. So diving right in, providing early visual feedback is one of the most important things that you can do for your website. As we saw earlier, visitors are getting more and more impatient. So the quicker that you can provide content, this is the faster that you can show that your site is loading, the higher the chances that you will grab their attention and you will actually engage with those visitors. There are a lot of ways that you can go about solving this problem, but today we're going to talk about optimizing TTFB. And although TTFB itself is not Core Web Vital, it directly correlates with LCP, and we'll see that in a second. but also there's a study in 2022 which shows that only about 29% of HTML documents were served from a CDN. And CDNs are actually great tools for optimizing TTFB. They are able to provide you with not only with an improvement in the time to first byte, but also consistency across the board. Because as we saw, the experiences of your visitors can range from very quick ones and fast ones to very slow ones. And oftentimes this can be due to network conditions, and CDNs allow you to cover all of your bases in that area. And time to first byte, for those who don't know, is the time measured between your browser sending a request for a simple for a certain web page and the time it took for the first data to arrive at the browser, so it can start actually processing something from your server. So here we have a simple example of a website where we did two tests with this website. On the left-hand side, we have the regular version of the website, let's say, which is not using a CDN to serve its content. And on the right-hand side, we can see the same website with the sole difference that we applied and used CDN to serve this website. And here we can directly see that in terms of numbers, LCP dropped down from 9.1 seconds down to 4.7 seconds, which is almost 5 seconds improvement just from having the CDN. And more importantly, we can visually see down in the film strip with the frame captures that on the right-hand side, the site was able to start rendering even in the first frame that was captured here. It was about half rendered already. And on the second frame, we had the site almost completely rendered, which is in a vast contrast with what happens on the left-hand side, where the first few frames are completely empty. So this is what you want to avoid. You don't want to have these empty stages where your visitors might end up wondering, is the site going to load? How much longer do I have to wait? Do I just leave now, or do I stay a little bit longer? So this is why you want to always show that your site is progressing and is loading, and it's very important to start showing this early. Next, in a similar fashion, we're going to talk about prioritizing above default content and rendering of above default content. So this is the content that is visible once this is first visible once your visitors land on your web pages, and this is the content is supposed to grab the attention of your visitors and make them stay and make them browse the rest of your page or even navigate to other pages. So your goal here is to display this content again as quickly as possible, so you don't lose the attention of your visitors. And there are a lot of ways to do this, but we'll talk about just 3. And here we also have a simple example of how what it looks to have optimized for loading quickly this above the font content versus no optimizations about it. This is again a demonstration website, and the same website on the left and on the right hand. On the left hand side, we have no optimizations. And on the right hand side, we have optimized the website to improve above the font rendering. And both websites start loading at the same time, but you can see how much different it looks and it feels, the site which has been optimized. Even though when measuring in lab, the site on the left has LCP of 3.5 seconds, and the site on the right has an LCP of 2.5 seconds, the perceived speed difference is much greater than that. So you definitely need to optimize for this. And the way you can do it, again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of ways you can go about it, but we suggest you at least do those 3. This is optimize your images, apply critical CSS, and optimize your fonts. All of these cover topics that and resources that are present on almost all pages nowadays. So it's very important that you optimize these ones. And now we're going to talk a little bit about responding to user input and how to make it quicker. But first, the reason why you want to have quick response to user input is because you might have spent all that time and energy for optimizing your loading times, but your users ultimately will start interacting with your site. They will click buttons, they will try to open the menu, submit forms, or whatever interactions that you have. They might be swiping on a gallery. You want these to feel instant-like in the ideal situation. But if they're feeling like sluggish or slow, it doesn't matter that you might have a very good initial load times. Your visitors will still categorize your website as a slow website if they cannot interact quickly with it. So here we have another example. Let me add this to the stream. All right, so we have an example page where we're going to try to open and close this the menu of this website, and we're going to see how it feels to interact with the regular version of the website, which is not optimized for responding to user input. And then we're going to go and do the same with an optimized version of the website. We're also going to use the Chrome extension for measuring Core Web Vitals to actually get a number assigned to these interactions. We're going to be looking at the INP metric here. So let's start opening and closing this menu. You can see how much time it takes to do these interactions. And in terms of number, it takes almost half a second to perform these, which is in the needs improvement bucket, and we definitely need to think of a way to improve it. And now let's hop over to the example where this this situation is improved. We're going to open and close this menu. You can see how much quicker it is and much more pleasant to interact with this version of the website. And in terms of numbers, we brought it down to 160 milliseconds to interact with the menu item. But even though the official threshold for INP is like 200 milliseconds and under, so you have to aim under 200 milliseconds, I'd suggest to even go down to under 150 or even under 100 for a more instant-like experiences. And sorry. Right, so in terms of what could cause slow interactions, like previously, there are many reasons why your website might be responding slowly, but typically these fall into three categories. So one would be long JavaScript tasks that are running and preventing response to user input. But we also see two other very common cases, which are a very large number of DOM elements on a web page, or a very large style sheet or CSS rules applied to a web page. Sometimes we see a combination. This is also very common. So luckily, those two, reducing the DOM size and removing reducing the size of your CSS, are kind of easy tasks to do. So it's very likely that you might have a lot of room for improvement there. In the example that we showed, the web page was simply heavy on DOM elements. The slow version had 11,000 elements, and the fast version contained roughly 3,000 elements. In terms of how to reduce the number of these elements, although it might seem like an impossible task, very often it's very simple. We see many customers having like e-commerce stores, and they often, for example, have sections with featured products, latest products, bestsellers, and they oftentimes contain a lot of products there, like 50 or 100 products per section. Reducing this number to, let's say, 10 or 20 products per section is your very easy way to reduce the number of DOM elements that you have on your page. Or if your site is one that has a comment section and people interact with it, this might be actually the reason for another common reason for high DOM sizes. What you can do there is just find a way to reduce the number of comments that you load initially, and then there are a lot of techniques that you can apply. Some are very easy to do to dynamically load more comments, or even better, find a way to seamlessly replace comments as people are scrolling, so you keep a consistent number of DOM elements on your pages. And for pages that might have large style sheets, many CSS rules, there are a lot of tools out there that can help you reduce your unused JavaScript, remove unused JavaScript, and drastically reduce those the size of those. So definitely go about and explore these options. And finally, we're going to talk about minimizing website junk, and of course, we will talk about what it is. So if you have any transitions on your website, animations, you have elements that you interact with, you want these interactions and these animations to be performed smoothly. You want your scrolling to be also smooth. You want rendering to happen at a consistent rate while scrolling. You don't want to have gaps of unrendered content while you're trying to read down the page, or you also don't want to have shifting layouts. So all of these are signs for website junk or just negative experiences. So here we are focusing, of course, on the how delightful is the experience. So your goal here is to make to be consistent in animations, consistent frame rates, and consistent in scrolling, rendering, those kind of things. Here again we have another example where we're going to talk and show how it feels when your website is running smoothly versus how it feels when it's having issues. In terms of issues, very often there is just a background job, typically a JavaScript, which is running and might be occupying the main thread for too long, so there's no way for it to perform animations, run render your website while you're scrolling. So as an example, we will start such a background job here, and we're going to scroll this web page, and we're going to see this section, which has animations, and you saw how laggy and choppy they were. And I'm not sure whether you noticed, so I'm going to repeat the test, but notice also how much time it takes when we scroll for the content to appear. Oh, let's go back to the top. All right, we're starting the background job again, and now we are scrolling. Look at how much time it takes for these animations to appear and the content to be presented to the visitor. And just to make the contrast, let's see how it looks when we're scrolling to the same section without the background job. So let's say we found and eliminated the issue. Look how much smoother and faster the content appears. So this is our goal. This is what we want. We want these smooth animations. We want content to appear as we scroll, and we don't want any hiccups. So this unfortunately is not so straightforward to kind of figure out and resolve, but as a suggestion, as a starting point, you first need to measure whether your site is performing okay. So this is the first step. Know when issues happen, know when there is a junk on your website, or know if there isn't. Your website might be very good in that regard. So my suggestion is first step, start measuring for this. A very basic kind of way to do this might be just for looking for dropped frames. If any of you is interested in how to do this, let us know. We can provide you with a few ways to start doing this. And by the way, Adam, Barry, if you have any suggestion on this topic, feel free to give us tips or any info that you might have.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. First of all, great. I love the demos. And also, I love the term jank because I know immediately that jank is something I don't want on my website. It just sounds bad. And I feel like when you're presenting jank, you've covered a little bit of CLS, like cumulative layout shift. Things shifting around probably contributes to what you feel like is jank. And then I feel like the INP metric is probably the one that's going to be best at capturing those really slow responses, the visual responses that we want to try to avoid. Although one thing about INP is it's only going to highlight sort of the worst interaction. And you're going to have to sort of repeat that process to keep digging down to figure out where the problems are coming from. I think in WordPress, often this comes from third parties. Honestly, it comes from scripts that we've embedded on our pages, either through like an OEmbed or through an ad frame, or maybe intentionally like with a chat or some other feature that we're trying to add to our website. So as website developers and owners, I think the big thing really is, as you're building out your site, pay attention to the effects of adding these additional scripts. When you add an embed, how does that affect your metrics? And if you already have a website and you want to test out changing things, my biggest advice is to get a staging environment set up. I think this is something that, and small businesses feel like it's too hard for them to have a staging environment. And I think in the past that was true. Recently, there are a lot of companies that have come out with really simple tools. Hosts do this now, where you can just click a button or install a plugin and you've got a separate staging environment where you can really try changing things, try disabling something, change settings, switch to a lighter solution. You know, if you're using a really heavyweight solution to do your animations, maybe there's something lighter weight that can do the same thing, what you need, without all the overhead of a really large plugin. So yeah, and I will say also there are some things we're doing in core, in WordPress core, to try to help out with the situation for the ecosystem. One good example of that is we're now adding lazy loading, which will help sort of, for things that are down lower on the page, they won't need to load immediately. So at least early on in page interactions, the browser can be more focused on what users are trying to do. Also, we have a new fonts API that's landed that hopefully eventually will lead to kind of reduced shift with fonts, which tends to be a big problem. And I think overall the responsibility does fall to site owners, but we are trying. I'll just say we're trying in core to improve the situation and provide APIs so that people can do a better job.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. I say WordPress and particularly static sites are normally, in theory, not a problem, but it is all the extra stuff which makes our websites rich and interactive and nice to experience, or adds to monetize them. But they all do add up, so you need to look at what you're putting on your website and understand the cost of that versus the experience suffering that might happen because of that. I think INP will be the first way that we're going to start measuring how busy our websites are. We've also looked at smoothness metrics. There's a blog post on web.dev about that, and whether that's going to be a future core web vital. It's not something we're concentrating on in the minute, and maybe INP will be enough to fix that. But yeah, it's definitely right. Again, this is a transition from measuring just how fast does your website load to how good is an experience is it after load while your users are browsing around it and using it. And I think we've all seen sites that are less than optimal whenever we're trying to use them. And particularly, us tech people tend to have pretty high-end gadgets and decent internet connections. But when you go to friends and families and they've got phones that are 4, 5, 10 years old, and you wonder how they actually are browsing the web these days, because it is a completely different experience there. And you suddenly realize how privileged some of us are and how we need to look at the rest. And again, looking at your real user data through Crux and stuff like that is a bit of an eye-opener to actually say, hey, it worked fine on my machine, but now I realize that my machine is not representative, and we need to do a much better job to make sure that all users can actually experience it to some degree a lot better than they do now.
Yeah, And that actually ties it up very nicely to our last point, which is try to measure across all of your users, because what we did here as an example, and when we were working on our websites, we were typically in a very nice environment, like in our offices, home, with good internet connection on a good device, which is typically not the case when people are actually visiting your website. They're likely on the go, on their mobile device, mobile network. So make sure that you are aiming to provide a good performance consistently across all devices, all geographies, and just all of your visitors. But yeah, and one of the things that gets me excited really with these new metrics and in the Core Web Vitals specifically is that they actually provide us with a way to quantify user experience, which we were not able to do this previously. And being able to quantify actually gives us a way to improve it, right? Because we can easily compare numbers. Yeah, so kind of excited about that. And with that, I think we're ready for a Q&A. So passing back to Georgi now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ivailo. It was super interesting, and thanks so much also, Adam and Barry. Before starting with the Q&A, I want to share that I remember when we initially started doing page speed optimizations, and the only available tool was, which actually made sense to us, was the Page Speed Insights version 1 in 2013. And we were so happy initially that we were making the websites fast, and the website owners were super easy to prove that they're fast. But then, like a few months later, they come to us and say, hey, listen, I have this visitor session recorded. So this is a visitor, let's say, from China or from any distant location, which is too far away from the website. You said that our website is fast, but it's not fast. So this was like the very early signs of Core Web Vitals, the Core Web Vitals need, of why we needed the crux and the Core Web Vitals. And yeah, this is how we, like, once the crux was out, now we are able to see through the eyes of our users and take the proper measures.
Thanks so much. I think that's a big part of the Core Web Vitals, because there's been a lot of RUM solutions out there for a while, and you know, some of them are fantastic and they're really good, but they were not all websites had it. They were typically the bigger players who could afford these solutions and that sort of thing. And I would encourage you to look at they've got a lot cheaper and are achievable now for even smaller sites. But just having, even with just the crux data, which is kind of a high-level overview and doesn't really give you much to drill down on, it just gives you something's wrong, maybe not the answer of what's wrong. But I think the shift to that from these static tools, the lighthouses, which, as I say, are fantastic tools, but the shift to actually measuring what users are doing and realizing just hitting that bare minimum of getting passing on those isn't enough. You need to look at your extra performance. You need to have a good bit of headroom for the people that just happen to be in slower connections that day, or are on older devices or stuff like that. You can never stop optimizing your performance enough, depending on what your user base is.
Yeah, exactly. Fully aligned. All right, time for Q&A. Let's see what we have here. So I'll start picking up questions. I see some activity. Let's start with the first question, which is, how can I, as a small business, pass Core Web Vitals? How can a small business pass Core Web Vitals? That's the question.
I'll give couple suggestions, I guess. One is, give yourself the head start of having a really good time to first byte. Like, make sure you're on a good hosting platform and that you have full page caching enabled. Like, that's just like a bare minimum. I've been amazed to see like the sort of race to the bottom with hosting companies trying to offer the cheapest possible plan. I don't necessarily think, as a business owner, think about how much you might spend on rent for a physical location. It's worth investing in a good host that can give you just that initial time to first byte. That's going to affect everything, right? I mean, we're going to talk about other things, but I think that's a good starting point. Yeah, other people have things, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And then, as we talked about earlier, being aware of what's in your site and doing a good spring clean. If you tried 46 different plugins and you're only using 3 of them, then make sure that the other, oh God, I'm going to have to do maths here on the fly. The other 43 are all fully removed from your site. If you're not using them, don't have them on your site, because it all does add up, even if it's not actually being used for every visitor. And similar, if you have, we mentioned earlier, third parties and even ones by Google, they're very popular and they're not the fastest sometimes. So if you have those sort of things, if you have Google Maps, do you need it on every single page if it's only on your Contact Us page? It's quite a heavy SDK that you need to pull into your site. So only use it on that Contact Us page if that's the only page that you have Google Maps on. And similar. So basically do an audit, do a cleanup. Google Tag Manager is another one that we see that tends to, people love to add tags. No one can be really bothered to do the cleanup and take away tags. So that would be my advice if you're a business owner, is to have a spring clean and see what you can do to make your site lighter. And often that's, as I say, removing stuff that you don't use anymore that you just never got around to removing. And that can have a big effect.
Yep.
Right.
And maybe on mine, I might be biased, but there are also a lot of solutions that can help you, like automated ways to improve a lot of aspects on your website loading strategies and the way it is built. Of course, it's always good to start with a good foundation, with pick a nice theme. There's a lot of different themes and builders nowadays if you're building a website on WordPress, for example. So nice foundation and a lot of plugins that can help you optimize for all the things that we practically talked in this session. So
Great.
One more thing, if I could go before we move on, there is the other thing is to make sure you're on the latest version. WordPress is very good about updating now, at least minor versions, but there's continual improvements to those things, and that includes for your plugins, your NitroPack and stuff like that. Again, a lot of them do auto update nowadays, so you need to mind it, but double check those things, because it is had a big focus in the last couple of years, and you might be missing out from free upgrades. Upgrades sometimes, if you're coming from a very old version, aren't that easy, but that's another reason to stay on top of these things. But you normally do get a performance boost from these things, from people like Adam who are committing to WordPress core, or the NitroPack team who are continually improving their own plugins and so on.
That made me think of one more thing to add, which is that, one of the things I see a lot is that people when you start out with a vanilla WordPress site, it's great, it's super fast, and it's as you add more and more things that you start to see problems. If you have a plugin that you love to use, that you pay for, and it's not performing well, ask the plugin authors to do something about it, because that's, I think, part of our maybe overall problem in WordPress is that plugins tend to be focused on adding more and more features. That's what's going to sell their product. And it's going to be when they start to hear from their users that performance is important to them, that the plugin authors actually take that into consideration. So I would say, as an end user, make sure that you're upstream telling whoever you use for your hosting, your plugins, your theme, tell them all that you care about performance, so that they invest in that as well.
Performance is very much a feature too, or it should be nowadays.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you guys for the answers. So let's go for another question. My core web vitals are good on desktop, but I fail on mobile. Why?
So this is quite a common thing. We see this quite a lot. Mobile is, on the most part, it's not always the case, but on the most part, it's a tougher environment. As I say, your desktop is plugged into probably fast broadband. Your mobile can be on super fast 5G and be brilliant, or you can be looking at a website in a train station in the middle of nowhere. So it very much depends on that. And as I mentioned earlier, mobiles are getting better. They don't break. I remember when mobiles first came out, you had to buy a new one every year, whereas now they're lasting so much longer, but it does mean that they're older. So we do see that it's a lot easier to pass Core Web Vitals on desktop than it is in mobile. Now, we set the same thresholds for simplicity on mobile and desktop. And the truth be told, they're more set at the mobile metrics rather than the desktop level. So we kind of veer towards something. We want them to be tough but achievable. and mobile is usually what we're kind of looking at there to see what achievability means. So yeah, they're more constrained devices. You need to be more aware of that. You need to look at what the solutions out there can mean for that. Do you need to serve a big print quality image that you could print out the size of your house and it would still look crisp and thing, or can it be a lot smaller, particularly on the mobile devices? Saying that, as I say, sometimes you see the opposite where mobile's really good. I used to live out in the country and I couldn't get broadband and my dial-up was terrible, but my mobile connection was actually faster than I got in the city because there wasn't a lot of people there. Mobile screens also tend to be a lot better than desktop or laptop screens unless you've got the latest computer. Most screens are 2-3 DPRs, so can display really crisp images. But again, do they need to display it to that pinpoint accuracy? If you're a photographic website or you're sending an e-commerce site and you want your products to all look beautiful or be able to zoom in potentially, or potentially you want different images for that and click here to actually get the high-res image to actually look at it. But it is a matter of fact that it's a more hostile environment to try and get right, and you need to look at that and work around that and not just go, oh, well, that's the case, what can you do? More and more people, for most websites, mobile is the predominant one. Quite often 60-70% isn't unusual of your traffic being on mobile. So you can't ignore this. You do need to look at this and see what's the best ways you can to optimize your performance as best as possible to give mobile that fighting chance of actually being performant.
That's great. I want to just add a couple things. First of all, it's if you can improve mobile, that's going to also improve desktop. So it's a good place to focus, especially like Barry said, since more and more people are using mobile now. The fact that you're failing on mobile, that's actually good news because it gives you room to improve. If all the scores were green, there'd be nowhere to go. So you've got work to do, but at least there's some hope that you can make progress. I heard a good analogy recently that I wanted to share, which is that most people are under 6 feet tall or 2 meters tall, and we still design doors for those people, right? So they can get through them comfortably. In fact, we design everything so that they can. So think of all your users. Don't just focus on the users that are fitting in the core Web Vitals. Focus on the whole thing. Really try to think about how you can improve it for everyone. Would be my advice.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why the core Web Vitals chooses 75th percentile. We recognize that there is going to be outliers. There's going to be those people in the middle of nowhere, those people whose networks drop in the middle of looking at your website. So we can't look at the 100th percentile and look at every user, much as we'd like, but you want to have a majority of your users having a good experience. And you also want to have a bit of that headroom so that if that majority changes slightly, as I say, you get a load of slow visitors one week, then suddenly you don't flip between pass, fail, pass, fail, pass, fail. You want to have a decent bit of headroom there so that you stay pass the whole way.
Yep. And as a kind of something that I also that came to my mind is that for mobile, we see very big differences in terms of geography. So maybe one thing to look at is how performance is actually by geography. So see whether you're failing if you're looking for a certain, let's say, country versus a more distant country and so on. So that can give you a hint where to optimize. And is it actually the distance that is the issue, or is it something in the code of your website?
That's a massively important aspect because certain countries, the next billion users we used to call them, your Indias, Malaysia, Brazils, those ones have a much higher mobile usage. People predominantly use it on mobile. They don't have the fancy desktop at home. So you can see a predominant mobile usage in those countries versus sort of the UKs, the Americas, where we're maybe half and half, and we spend a lot of our time sitting in front of our desktop computers there. A lot of people don't, and the majority of their experience in that. And a lot of people then, as I say, don't have the latest Android phones with the 6 gigs of memory and fantastic network connections. So you need to see and understand what can we do for these people if they are a large proportion of your traffic.
Yep.
Right, great. 10 amazing answers. Thanks so much, guys. So moving to the next question. Let's pick, how can I improve COS on a website with ads iframe? The iframe is creating a lot of requests for many other ads platforms, so it's kind of a loop.
One thing that I can think about is I've seen ad situations where ads are dynamically popping into containers that are not predefined. So you're scrolling and they appear in the middle of your screen. So this could be causing a lot of CLS. So it might not be the fact that the ads are loaded in an iframe, but prepare placeholders for where you want to place your ads and load them only there. So
that's a big part, because we get that the default size of an empty div before an ad is put in there is 0 pixels by 0 pixels. So some ads are dynamic and you might get slightly different spaces, but I can guarantee you if you've got an ad slot there that you're going to fill all the time, it's not going to be 0 pixels high. So yeah, leave the space for it. You may not be able to leave the exact perfect space, but you can certainly reduce that CLS impact a huge amount by leaving either the minimum ad size or the average ad size or something like that. And then the other thing I'd say is think about where your ads are. If you've got an ad at the top that's moving your whole content down and loading late, that's quite irritating. Whereas if you've got your content on the left and your ads appearing on the right, that's usually less disruptive experience. Or if ads are appearing halfway down through your content, then usually those are loaded by the time people scroll down there. The absolute worst place is a big banner ad at the top, unless you can leave that experience when you do that. Sorry, Adam, I interrupted you.
That's okay. No, I was going to add just a few things. Definitely reserving the size for the ad slot, making sure you have like a fixed size for that element where the ad is going to fit in. Typically, ads that are backfilled are you don't know what the size is when you request the ad. It could come in multiple sizes, but as the business owner, you actually can control which sizes you'll accept. So use sizes that are not going to create layout shift. Leave the white space. For terms of the banner ad at the top, do not do that. That's a horrible ad position. Low viewability. If you have one, and you check your stats, you'll see no one sees this ad because they scroll before the ad even loads. So just avoid that ad slot entirely. If you can move to direct sold ads versus programmatic ads, that means ads that you've sold directly to your clients. You can choose the format exactly. You can get the layout you want. When you're doing those programmatic or backfilled ads, those are just coming from the network. Anyone's kind of bidding on that space. You don't know what size is going to come in, and that's where the layout shift is going to occur. Because, and then the other thing that can happen is you can get slots that collapse because no ad is served. If no one bids on the slot, right, this is a bidding system, then no ad is served. Typically, the slot will collapse. You can change that behavior and instead serve your own creative, something that advertises your newsletter or your product. So make sure those slots are stable. That's the most critical thing. And then I would just also encourage you to reduce the number of sizes that you accept, especially those that might cause shift. That's it for me.
Great. Thanks, guys. Okay, we have time for one last question. I see that many questions are already answered. So I'm just picking up something that I believe is a good topic if it's exactly in the way I understand it. But basically the question is, what are good practices to consider in terms of performance when building a page in WordPress? Probably it refers to page builders, but we can also answer it in a more general way. Yeah, that's the question.
Adam, this sounds like one for you.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing I said already is get a staging site. I think this is probably like as someone who's trying to really mess around with your site, you don't want to do that on your live site. If you can do it, if you have a local setup, that's another option. But a staging site is a really great sort of just tool for you to feel confident in trying different things without worrying about what's happening with your main site. I think we've talked about a lot of these things before. If you're building out a new site, make sure that as you're building it out, you're very conscious about the trade-offs between the features that you're adding and how they may affect the performance of your site. This could just be doing lab tests regularly as you're adding things. One thing I would say is looking to shift more towards a block-based world. So block themes are highly performant compared to classic themes. If you can switch to a block theme, that's going to give you an instant performance boost. In addition, we have a concept called block plugins. These are plugins that are installed directly in the editor. So you type / and you type some type of block that you don't have installed yet, and it searches the block directory and will bring in a block plugin for that specific feature. The advantage of block plugins over traditional plugins is that they tend to be sort of more JavaScript based and highly focused on the feature that you're trying to insert, whereas traditional plugins tend to be a lot broader and include a lot of features that maybe you don't need. Yeah, so those are my top recommendations. Again, switch to the block world, make sure you're testing as you build things out, and get a staging environment so that you can iterate and really try things out without any fear.
I'll be very nice to our hosts here, and I'll give a little shout out to NitroPack, because I'm a web performance nerd and I'll spend ages optimizing sites as much as I can. But you got to realize what's maintainable there. So if you're sitting there and spending ages making this beautiful blog post or announcement post really performant, is that long-term achievable? Or is there more automatic solutions like NitroPack or those sorts of things, or looking at things like your CDN, your hosting, that's going to have a bigger impact across all your pages going forward, rather than just trying to get, a lot of effort needed for every single page or every single bit of your site launched, because there's a lot of great web performance people out there who will gladly charge you money to optimize your website, but you've got to think about how maintainable this is going forward. Are you going to be able to hire them for every new page you put up and stuff like that? So do look at your overall site and how things are going to be changed as you add new content and stuff there. So if you're adding images, make sure they're optimized from the get-go. Make sure you've got a process in place for that, or ideally the uploads take care of that automatically, rather than go around, optimize all our images, everything's fantastic, and then over the next 6 months it just slowly degrades again as those marketers go and put those big images up without any think about that. So think about the long-term maintainability of your performance.
Yeah, Barry, right. I can build up on what you just said, is that I've never seen optimization to be a one-off effort for any website. So it's always a continuous thing going on. So even if you plug something, or if you hire someone, or if you do some substantial effort to optimize your website and you see everything in green, pass, that's fine. But very likely in the next 3 to 6 months, you'll start failing. And why? Because things change. Your audience changes, the geographies, the devices type changes, your hosting changes, basically where you host the site, they have deployed new updates and something might be breaking. Your plugins update, or something changes on your software. The browser changes, so the way it measures Core Web Vitals measurement will change over time as well. Also, and the biggest change is like you updating the website and putting new content there now and then. So we've never seen this one-off effort to work, and that's why we believe the optimization effort should be continuous. If there can be automatic, is great. If not, probably the people who are managing should be aware, from developers to content editors to anyone, should be aware what kind of content they're adding and what code they're deploying. But generally, it's something that we need to take care of on a continuous basis.
And on that point, I think monitoring it going forward, again, Core Web Vitals have kind of made that easier. People are getting alerts from Search Console, and they're checking Crux dashboards and that sort of thing. But what you don't want is it's all fine, and then I forget to look at it for 12 months and it's gone terrible. What changed over that 12 months? When did it go wrong? I don't know. You kind of want to see, ideally the day after or within a month after, that, oh, right, okay, that fantastic new website that we launched that was really heavy and had big videos everywhere maybe wasn't such a great idea in hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Amazing. Thanks so much, guys. So that's all with the Q&A session. If there's anything unanswered, we'll be happy to answer it post this webinar. Don't worry. So let's go to what's coming next. Basically, we'll be having another webinar, which will be focusing on the responsiveness optimization, the imperative of the responsiveness optimization. It's going to be September 14th, where we're going to show some very interesting new stuff in the Core Web Vitals world, and we're going to be discussing how, again, these metrics affect the visitor experience and the visitor behavior. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.